This is ZEISS Presents Full Exposure, the weekly resource for news, trends, and the people who influence the world of photography and cinematography. Hosted by veteran photographer and filmmaker Jim Kamp.
For those who joined last week, this is part 2 of our conversation with social documentary photographer Stephen Shames.
If someone is starting out, I would recommend to them, if they want to be a journalist, there's a lot of different kinds of photography, but if you want to be a photojournalist, one way to break in is to do a long-term story. And they should do something that they really know.
Right. Like writers, write what you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot what you know.
Exactly. I mean, if you're starting out, you won't have the technical skills of someone who's been doing it like 50 years like me. But if you know a topic really well, you'll be able to get in there better than I could. I might have better photo skills, but you know the topic.
Right. Well, I mean,
and you know the people, or you know that community.
Right.
And people are still doing. I mean, there's some great work coming out today. People are doing it. There just aren't journalistic places for them.
I was just going to say, what's left? What's left? Who's supporting that kind of work?
Well, people do books. You can do a book. A lot of people, a lot of journalists are working for nonprofits and NGOs.
And you've done quite a bit.
I've done some of that, and people want photojournalistic work for that. They're hiring you so they can raise money. So they want you to photograph their program and show how good it is. And you take your journalistic skills, and hopefully their program really is good. And if it really is good, then you can be honest and do it. If the program isn't so good, then you end up doing PR. You're not a journalist anymore. But, I mean, that's like focused journalism. A lot of companies want a photojournalistic look. I mean, a lot of the healthcare companies and other people want will hire photojournalists. Fashion, Nike and people like that will hire. They don't just hire photojournalists; they hire advertising people too. But I'm saying they kind of like that photojournalistic look. A lot of people like that reality, that reality look. I'll tell you a funny story. I got an assignment years ago to do something on during Fashion Week in New York on this supermodel. Annie Morton was her name, and that was at the time when the kind of the heroine look was in fashion. And so I spent the week with Annie Morton going around and actually met all the top designers, because she would go in to be fitted. And when she went in, if she went to see Ralph Lauren, she would see Ralph Lauren and his assistants. I mean, and if she went to see Donna Karan, she would see Donna Karan would be there, because it was Fashion Week, and the heads of the companies, this was a big deal. They were putting out their wares. There was a lot of money at stake. They weren't going to have some administrative assistant in charge. They actually showed up. And I won't say who it was, but one of these top fashion people, I had given Annie Morton my book, Outside the Dream, Child Poverty in America. And she liked the book, and she was carrying the book around, and she showed it to the fashion designer, and there's a picture of a kid shooting up, right, in the book. There's this 15-year-old boy shooting heroin into his arm. And she saw that picture, and she looked at me, and she said, "How did you get that look? We've been trying to get that look." And I bit my tongue, I bit my lip, because I was photographing for the magazine, so I didn't say what I wanted to say, like, "You moron, it isn't a look. The kid's actually shooting heroin. And why would you want to do a fashion picture with the heroin look? Isn't that kind of exploitive and ridiculous?" I didn't say that. I just smiled and said nothing, but it was really just funny. How did you get that look? It wasn't a look. He was really doing it. Anyway, You have when you're a photojournalist, you have a million stories like that, you know.
You mentioned something about, earlier about young photographers and, what kind of advice you give them. I mean, when you were starting out, when I was starting out, there were, like we talked about, there were magazines, and you could make a living. It wasn't a great living, but you could make a living doing it if you got assignments and so forth. And you had an agency, where you could sell your stock and all that stuff. Now it's kind of been, I think some people might say commoditized, because there's just, everybody's got a camera in their pocket and so forth. So, it's a...
Well, I don't worry about that,
But I'm talking about how young people...
No,
would
but
look at it,
I understand. What I was going to say is that, that the internet and the fact that, people are giving away pictures for nothing and that the magazines have gone, that's affected. The fact that everyone has a camera, look, pretty much everyone's literate too. Whereas if you go back in history, there was a time when only the monks and a few scholars knew how to write and everyone else was illiterate. And so those people wrote and the rest of the people didn't write at all. Now everyone knows how to write. Are there really that much good? Is there more good writing going on now than was happening in 1200? I doubt it. I don't think there's more good photography going on now than was going on in the 60s or 70s.
Some people would say that if you have a pencil, that doesn't mean you're a writer.
Well, that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
Everyone has a camera, and so everyone knows how to take pictures, but not everyone's a good photographer. In fact, most people stink. I mean, if you look on Facebook and you look around and you look at all the stuff that people are taking, they're just snapshots. I mean, they're not...
There's just more of them.
Yeah, there's just a lot more.
People used to do that. There's
just a lot more of them.
Yeah.
I mean, before people took pictures and just put them in their family albums, no one else saw it except the family. Now people take pictures of what they're having for lunch. In fact, we forgot to do that. Can we order lunch again? And I forgot to post my lunch. Oh my God, what's the world gonna do? They're not gonna know what I had for lunch today. No, but I mean, there's a ton of more pictures, and I don't even know if, I mean, there's a lot of issues around that. I don't know if 500 years from now, if half of these pictures are going to still be someplace or there's going to be some new platform and no one will be able to access them. I mean, we can get the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can look at things that people have written, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, whatever. Because it's preserved, even old books. Some of them have survived. There's some old libraries, old text and ancient texts that have survived. I don't know what's going to survive from what we're taking now. That's a whole issue.
A lot of archivists talk about that. How is the media going to be read in 100 years or whatever? Whereas paper, everybody knows it lasts well more than 100 years, hundreds of years, 1,000 years, whatever.
So we had to make prints, but people don't. Most people don't even make prints anymore. I don't make prints of most of my stuff anymore. It's just all digital. It goes to the photo agency as a digital file, and people publish it as a digital file if they, but most of what I'm getting published is a lot of it's online too. It's in different blogs. So.
Well, when we were talking earlier, it was pretty interesting because I was telling you about the film on Gary Winogrand, and one of the early street photographers who sort of evolved into a fine art photographer, or at least was seen later as a fine art photographer. When you started out doing photojournalism, doing this type of social documentary photography that you're so well known for, I'm sure you had no imagination that you were going to be in art collections, doing art shows. You're on your way to France now for a show, right, of your work. What do you think about that as far as, young people today, how you've evolved as a photographer, and, what is it a function of? Is it a function of just, I think you were saying something earlier about when we were talking before we came on that if you wait long enough and your work is good enough, it will sort of morph into a new genre.
Right. Well, first of all, art, because the magazines have kind of gone and there isn't that outlet as much anymore, people are jumping right out of college into wanting to do books. And I mean, I see young photographers graduating from college and, I want to have an art dealer. I mean, we never thought that when we just started out, we were even good enough to have an art dealer. And kids today, but in a sense, I understand that because that's the venue. You get into the art world, or you get a book out, because you can't go to Time magazine and do a story and have them publish it, or so that becomes a whole, that becomes the whole thing. For me, it just evolved. I mean, it really, when the first Panther book came out in 2006, Stephen Kasher Gallery, Stephen Kasher's my gallery guy, and his gallery is called the Stephen Kasher Gallery. He's really good. I mean, he has a lot of photographers and does a lot of art, but it's documentary art, and people who had been documentary photographers. But he has other, he has a wide range of people that he represents. He did a show on the Panthers, and the show did really well, and so now most of my income, I mean, I sell, people license pictures to use in films and in books, and I'm doing books, but really it's the art world where I'm existing now. And I'm doing books. I'm in a number of museum collections. I mean, this year the Museum of Modern Art, the Smithsonian African American Museum, the Metropolitan Museum, the Schomburg, a number of other museums, SF MoMA, a number of other museums, Philadelphia Museum of Art, a number of museums like that have purchased prints, and so I'm in the permanent collections, those of all those museums, and that's kind of where my work is sitting now. You're not seeing it in a magazine, or you're seeing it in a book.
But a lot of that is your documentary work.
Correct? Well, it's work that I did as documentary work. And one of the things that happens with documentary work, as opposed to people like Winogrand, who started out as art photographers and weren't doing documentary, they were in the art world. A lot of documentary work, when you're doing it, is controversial. I mean, the Black Panthers were controversial. I mentioned that it took 40 years for that book to get published. It couldn't come out right away. The work was, too emotional for people, that people were living it. There's something about, 40, it's something about 40 years. And, I joke Moses, wandered in the desert for 40 years. But really, Moses did it because he understood that slaves could never think like free people. And you needed the two generations for the Israelites, the Israelites to be able to, the grandchildren of the slaves who had been slaves in Egypt, to actually think like free people. So they had to wander in the desert for 40 years. Mao kept China apart from the world for 40 years. Not to make them free, but to do whatever it was he wanted to do. But he understood that same principle. Well, that applies to documentary photography. Also, after basically a generation or two, things that are controversial become history. The Panthers are still controversial to a lot of people, but to most people, they don't even know who they are. They look at the pictures without the emotion. When young people look at the Panther pictures, they look at them as photographs, as history, the same way they might look at a picture from World War II or a picture from World War I or the Civil War.
But there's also a current context now with Black Lives Matter and what's going on politically in the country and so forth.
Well, that's true too. No, you're right. That does resonate with that. So the Panthers still. Part of the reason that the Panthers are a big deal now is because of Black Lives Matter and because Obama was president, now Trump's president as a reaction, and those issues are still very much with us. I mean, poverty hasn't ceased to exist. I mean, we won't get political. I won't go through all the issues, but most of the issues that were affecting African Americans and poor people in 1970 are still issues today. Just about every single one is still an issue. So that resonates. I mean, the Poverty Project, people are doing new poverty projects. Poverty is still an issue. There are a lot of people who basically the internet and globalization has taken away a lot of high-paying jobs for Americans. So even though the unemployment rate is very, very low, there are a lot of people, such as, let's say, at Walmart, who are working, full-time, who are getting food stamps, who are needing public assistance because they're not getting paid. Teachers are exactly. So that issue, the poverty issue and the jobs issue, it's different than it was in 1970, but that's still an issue.
Yeah, there's a photographer, I can't remember his name right now, but there's a photographer did a story recently on that for The Guardian on teachers and how they have to have multiple jobs.
Right. Well, yeah, and I saw that online. I think that Time Magazine blog ran a thing where they had a portrait of the teacher, and then the text was, "What do I do besides being a teacher?" And some of them were working 2 or 3 jobs.
When you do,
I want to say one other thing about Outside the Dream before we close that. Sure. One of the ways that was I learned from Ken Light, who's a photographer and also a professor of photography out at UC Berkeley, the Graduate Journalism Center there. He hooked up with organizations when he was doing a project. He said the best way to do a long-term project is to find an organization that's their issue, that would be able to use the pictures and then team up with them. Yeah. And that's so the Children's Defense Fund, actually, they co-published that book with Aperture, Outside the Dream, Child Poverty in America. And through Marion Wright Edelman and the Ford Foundation, they made sure that book got to every member of Congress, governors, people on children's committees and state governments, and every Fortune 500 CEO. And we did an exhibit, and they really taught me, Marion Wright Edelman really taught me how to use a set of pictures for advocacy. And one of the things I mentioned that photographers, photojournalists are doing nowadays is working for NGOs and nonprofits to do advocacy. Out of that project came another project called Pursuing the Dream, which the Ford Foundation funded, which ended up being a 2.5, 3-year project where I photographed solutions to poverty. And that became an exhibit. They got another big grant, and that became an exhibit in 10 different states. And I think the pictures were actually put in the rotundas of either 3 or 4 states. I know California, Colorado, Connecticut, where we are right now. Between the governor or the speakers of the state houses during budget season, they actually put the exhibit in the rotunda of the state legislatures. So, and Pennsylvania was the 4th state, where the legislators, the state senators and state assembly people walked by the pictures with the text and actually saw not just poverty, but solutions to poverty, programs. And obviously the governors of those states did it because they were trying to get legislation passed that would help poor families get out of poverty. So that's kind of what I've been doing ever since. But I actually learned that from Ken Light. I learned that from Marion Wright Edelman, and then through the Ford Foundation. My people at the Ford Foundation helped with that.
Yeah,
and
you almost anticipated my question by answering it, because what I was going to ask you was, with the sort of diminution of magazines, and especially in the United States, for publishing all this kind of work, how can the work have an impact if it doesn't have a wide audience, especially nowadays with still photography, because video is so predominant, but you answered it by working for organizations where you share.
Yeah. And since then, and that kind of took me full circle back to the Panthers, who used photography, to advocate, and art to advocate. They had an artist, Emery Douglas, who did this, art. At the time, they were like a political kind of cartoon. Mm-hmm. They weren't cartoons, but they were like drawings that they put in the paper. But now Emery's, and I'm doing an exhibit with it. It's Emery's exhibit, but some of my pictures are in it. He's in museums now. But since then, I did a project for the Casey Foundation on fathers, how important dads were in the community. And then New York City hired me to do pictures, which they put in the subways and buses and bus stops, to get men, especially low-income men, into parenting programs and job programs, mm-hmm. and really advocate, good parenting and good fathering, and how important men are, mm-hmm. or could, to the family and to children. So I did that project, and then recently I've been, I mentioned I've been exhibiting and doing exhibits. Often when there's the exhibit, you talk to the press. In France, I'm going to be doing a workshop for some photographers in Lille, France. They're setting that up. I'm going to work with some local photographers. That's a Black Panther exhibit.
Okay, but this is at a gallery, or is it who's hosting this?
I guess it's at a gallery / museum. I haven't been there. I'm not quite sure where it is. It's a photography center. It's not a commercial gallery.
Yeah.
It's a public, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a museum per se, but it's a museum or kind of public art space where people have exhibits. Recently, my latest project.
Yours good. I was just going to
segue
you into
the question.
That. No. You don't need me. Go ahead.
Okay.
Let's talk about, because I did want to go into, because that's what I was kind of going in the direction.
Well, I saw you put the picture up, so
okay, I kind of gave it away.
You cued me.
Going from how your early work has sort of become appreciated by collectors and museums and as art, and now you're more focusing it seems in a more precise way on doing that, and sort of reinventing the way you still communicating socially, but doing it in a new way. Maybe let's talk about that.
Right. Well, I mean, the two big issues in the world today are income inequality, of which poverty is a subtext of that, and climate change. And climate change it puts us in a unique place in the history of humanity and the history of life on this planet, and the life that we know in the universe. There may be other life out there in the universe, but we haven't found it. Because if we don't get a handle on climate change, the possibility is there that we could extinguish life on Earth. And that's not a new thing. I grew up in the 50s. In the 50s, with the nuclear bomb, there was the threat that we might blow ourselves up and blow the planet up. And obviously that hasn't happened yet. Climate change is more insidious because it doesn't require someone to push the button and start a war. It's just by our everyday living and our lifestyle, and you know, with CO2 emissions and all the plastic we're throwing into the ocean and all the species that are dying off, and you know, the temperature rising, we may be in real trouble in as little as 50 years. Water is a part of that. Water is in short supply. I basically approximately 1 billion people today, which is 1/7 of the world, lack access to safe water, and even more don't have decent sanitation. That's going to be worse in 20 or 30 years. Possibly, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 billion people aren't going to have safe water. I mean, Flint, Michigan right now doesn't have safe water. Western states, California and Arizona, are fighting over the Colorado Water River, most of which is used for agriculture. There are communities in Arizona, because they're a red state that doesn't believe in much regulation, where groundwater is run out.
Oh, and in Florida too, where everybody thinks there's a lot of water. Water's an issue because of development and you know, eroding the natural filter of the Everglades and so forth.
Exactly. In places in Africa and in Asia, there's either not enough water in places in Africa. In Asia and Bangladesh and some of those countries, there's too much water, and some of the South Sea islands are going underwater. And right now, North and South Carolina have more water than they want. Puerto Rico got more water than it wanted. Texas got more water than it wanted. So water is a big issue. So the water project is an art project, and the idea was to create an object. I didn't want to put pictures on the wall or do it as a book. I wanted to create an object that people could actually hold. And so the water bottle, you know, there's all these fancy water bottles out there. Mm-hmm. And people sometimes spend as much as $5 or $6 on a bottle of fancy water. Even at a supermarket, you can spend $2 or $3 on a fancy bottle of water. So what I did is I created water bottles, and I made labels for the water bottles that showed water, people using water in positive aspects. Like this picture shows, you know, there's the third bottle over is a Club Med. There's a kid jumping into the water in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. There's a guy bathing in Bangladesh, and there's another woman in the Caribbean at a beach. Mm-hmm. But other of the water pictures show people without water. There's a picture of a girl in the Philippines with 2 water buckets because she went to a well. And then, you know, and I paired it with a picture of 2 kids in a swimming pool in New York and a kid bathing outside in India, you know, just using a bucket to bathe. And this picture shows the woman in Club, you know, there's a woman in Club Med and someone in a sailboat, Dominican Republic,
that's
beautiful.
Some juxtaposition of the woman on the beach and the young child with 2 jerry cans.
Yeah, 2 jerry cans getting water from a well.
Beautiful picture.
And then on the right, there's a picture of someone who's dug a well, and they're actually getting water out of the ground. And that's in
Where is that?
That's in Uganda. So you know, I wanted to juxtapose that to get people to have this object that's a beautiful object that they can put in their home, but also to get them thinking about
the connection,
the contradiction, because it's one of the things that Panthers taught me is all about contradictions. The contradiction of this fancy water bottle, which I've created, that's showing something else. And here's a child laborer. He's fishing. And on the other, that's the Nile River, a beautiful, just a sunset picture of the Nile River. That's not a, you know, there's not 2 different ones. It's just some kids at the beach. But here again, this is in the left is in Uruguay, and the right is Africa. On the left is some tourists at a beautiful beach, and the right is a little girl, just drinking water.
Yeah, but we do take it for granted.
Well, we do, especially in New York, where I live, where you have some of the best water in the world. I mean, you actually can drink tap water in New York, and it's actually
bottled
wonderful.
and sold.
Bottled and sold. Let's see what some other ones. Well, here's another one. 2 kids with jerry cans and 3 kids jumping into a swimming pool. So again, it's just to show the contrast.
Yeah.
And, and if this goes well, I did 42 of these labels.
Mm-hmm.
If this goes well, I may shoot some new stuff. All of this was done with pictures that I already had from the past 50 years.
Did you do this project independently, or did you do it with the support of any
No, I just did this independently. I mean, the pictures, I already had all the pictures. So I decided, I haven't found, if anyone's listening wants to partner, what I want to do with this is partner with a climate change / water organization that can, I don't care if I make money off of this. As long as, it didn't cost me that much because I already had all the pictures. And so it's just to print the labels. We actually found a place. I worked with Ryan Spaeth, who's a printer, does my digital printing for fine art printing. He's a great printer and also, artist in his own right. And he worked with me on this, and he found a place that makes labels for commercial, soda bop, and water bottles. And so it's a waterproof label. It actually has a sticky on the back. And so we actually, and then I purchased the bottles on the internet and it would ship to me. And we just put the labels on, and the water I take from the tap because the New York water's great. And so I did 42 of these, and I did them from pictures that I already had. What I'm looking for is maybe a gallery or museum or someone who would like to exhibit them. Right. And more to the point, if I can find an organization. I just finished this last Tuesday.
Oh,
we just got the labels last Tuesday. So this is literally, the ink's still dry on it, So I wrote some letters to some, sent some emails to some people that I know that are in the field, and just asked them, can you recommend an organization that might be interested in partnering
really
with
in
me?
The process.
Yeah, it's really in the process. So if someone listening is from an organization, they're interested in partnering, this could be a way for them to raise awareness and money. They could sell these bottles, and then, what's nice about it is it's an object that someone can actually have the bottle and put it on the shelf in their bookshelf or kitchen or dining room table, and their kids can take it to school at show and tell. And but I'm saying that was the point of it. It's like a talking stick. Some native indigenous tribes, they'll sit around and pass whatever it is that they're passing and talk. And so I wanted to create a little icon that could be, like the Aborigines could, that used as a talking point. So I always am thinking as an artist of using, history. Indigenous people are really smart, and they have customs, things they've done for thousands of years, and there's a reason that it works. And now we have this big, media conglomerates running around, but in some ways they're very pervasive, but in other ways they've forgotten some of the simple everyone's doing everything on the internet, even politically. They're just doing everything digitally. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that's one of the mistakes, that people make. And I think that that's something that young people don't experience, is actually that face-to-face, the talking to people, having an object. I read a thing yesterday on in some news blog that one of the reasons young people don't send in their absentee ballots is because they don't know where to buy stamps. You're laughing. And I actually
I'm laughing and I'm crying.
That's not because they're stupid. Because they know how to do, work with their phone and blog and do stuff that I don't know how to do. So I'm not making fun of young people. But what I think one of the things that we've lost is just that, person to person.
Yeah, we're very connected, but we're less connected.
And everything is digital.
Well, let's talk about something non-digital.
Yeah.
Your upcoming book projects that you're rolling on.
Okay, well, I've got the main project that I'm rolling out is a book about the 60s, the different movements and things that were going on in the 60s, which includes the hippies and that stuff. A lot of photos of people from back then, for everyone from the Rolling Stones to Martin Luther King, and then the movements, the Black Panther movement, the Black Panther Party, the anti-war movement, the war in Vietnam and the protests against the war in Vietnam, Kent State, March on Washington.
Now, is this a monograph, or are you going to be?
It's a monograph. Oh. Yeah, it's just the pictures I took back in the day. Cesar Chavez and the Farm Workers Union, Farm Workers Union, the Alcatraz Indians, the Indians of all tribes who took over Alcatraz as a protest, Angela Davis trial, the Third World Liberation Front strike at Berkeley to create and San Francisco State strike to create a Black Studies departments. And there was one other thing which now is escaping me, but I'll remember it in a minute.
As far as in the 60s?
Yeah, as far as in the 60s. But anyway, I photographed all those things, so it's really kind of not totally complete, but I mean, it's one person's view of what I experienced and saw and photographed.
Is that all together now, or are you still editing?
No. We've put together a proposal and put together a set of about 200 pictures or 300 pictures, which of course will get edited down. But that's kind of what we're going to work with, We're working to try and get to try and get that out. My mind is actually going. Yeah. And I'm working with an editor by the name of Christopher Sweet, who's a freelance editor, but right now. But he's worked with most major companies, and he's presenting the book to people, and he helped me. Select the pictures, so he'll maybe be one of the editors on the book.
Did you have one other book project on? Was it
Alcatraz? Yes, it's also an older project that we did at the time that never got published. Richard Oakes was the leader of the Alcatraz Indians, and we did a book with Alan Copeland and who I talked about earlier, me. Our photographs and Richard Oakes' text about being on Alcatraz, because we were some of the few people who were non-Indian, non-native, people that they allowed out there, and we were allowed to stay. We could stay overnight or whatever. We could stay out there. That book didn't get published at the time. I think going back to that 40 years thing, I think. They were looking for Chief Dan George, and they got Richard Oakes, who was a very angry guy who didn't mince words, talked about what we had done to, basically we committed genocide against the Indians and wiped most of them out. And those that are left, there's large problems with alcoholism and identity. I mean, we took their children away from them and sent them to schools to, quote, civilize them. All these kind of horrible things, which were, dealing with. I mean, maybe we should have gone to their schools and gotten civilized, and civilized us. I'm not sure we're so civilized, but that's just the height of arrogance to think that we're the height of civilization and all these other cultures are beneath us. I mean, that just, it's absurd.
Yeah.
That all cultures have good and bad aspects, and we're superior in certain things, and other cultures are superior in other aspects and history. If you look at the history of the world, there's different times, different cultures in different areas of the world where we're on top. And America's been on top for a while, but it looks like the next century is going to be China's, not ours. And we need to get used to that. And that isn't because Chinese people are better than us any more than we were better than the other people. It's just that a bunch of historical factors and other social, a lot of things come together. And that's, so someone ends up winning and other people end up losing. Anyway, Richard wrote the book. There's some really nice pictures. So the book that's not going to be a monograph. That's going to have Alan's pictures and my pictures and Richard's. I've been in contact with Richard's children, and they haven't signed on to it yet, but hopefully they will. But I sent them some of the pictures, and I sent them Richard's. Again, that's something that's just happened in the past week or so. I sent Richard's essay to them, and to let them look over what he had written, and hopefully they'll get involved. And I would love them to be involved in the book. Maybe one of them will want to write something for the book.
Cool.
But that, again, I haven't talked to them about that yet. So this is, they'll get back to me after they've read the essay and tell me what they think. And that's kind of, how I work. That's another way of embedding yourself. You really have to, as a journalist, I like, that was what I did with the Panther book too. Let the Panther speak. I think it's, I did one video that I did on Friends of the Children, which is a program that came out of the Pursuing the Dream, what helps poor children and their families succeed. So I went back and did a video using still pictures, but we recorded sound, and then put that together, and a professional house put that together. I was a director, but there was a kind of professional, a Chinograph put that together. They're a professional video production house in New York City, really top people. And we did that film, but there was no narration. In other words, the people, the film is carried by all their
voices.
Their voices,
Right.
The people who worked at the program and the kids and parents who were in the program talking about the program. And that's how I like to work.
I couldn't agree more. That's how I like to work
think
too.
the kind of white man narrator, well, this is the truth, and now I'm going to tell you the truth in this documentary, Now, of course, we have women and other people, but back then it was all, white guys, narrating these things with the deep baritone voice. But I really feel that I love oral histories, Studs Terkel and all this, I love oral history, the idea, let the people speak for themselves. Even when
Seems like that would be a natural thing for you to get into.
Well, even when I'm taking pictures, the proudest moments I feel if the people in the pictures feel that the pictures are telling their story. Because I don't, if I say it, it's going to, I don't like to say it because it sounds arrogant. It's like I want to be the voice for those people, and that doesn't sound right when you say it. But what I really mean is I want to embed myself in the community and become part of the community I'm photographing, and then let the community speak through me, through my eyes and what I experience. And when there's text, I've been doing a lot more text. The past two books that I've done have been about almost half text. Like the Panther book is half text and half photos. It's not a purely photo book. It really, if you took the photos out of the book and just read the text, I think it would still be a decent book that would give what the Panthers thought about what they were doing, which is the side that hasn't really been told. The government side's been told, but the Panthers' voices haven't been heard. And so that's what I wanted to do with that book, with the Alcatraz book, I want to do the same thing through Richard Oakes and hopefully through maybe his children, who were also out in the island, although they were small children at the time. Tell that story again from the first person view of the inside, not as a quote objective journalist, which, as we know,
it's kind of a myth.
It's kind of it's kind of a myth, and that doesn't mean that there's no truth. I mean, I think things have gone so far where we now have the concept of alternate truth. I mean, that's the alternate of a truth is a lie. That's the alternate truth is a lie. So I don't mean that. I mean what I mean is that people have different viewpoints and they see different things, but facts are facts.
Right.
I mean, if 50 people were on the boat, then 50 people were on the boat.
Well, and pictures and pictures kind of don't lie in the sense that, you know, they you see what you see is what you see. You can interpret it different ways, but you know. Right.
And so my idea of doing documentary projects is to take people there where they necessarily, you know, can't go themselves. Because most people live in a little bubble. They have their house, they have their family, and then they go to work, and then they come home, and then maybe they go on a vacation for 2 or 3 weeks if they're lucky. You know, but they're in a little bubble, and they're not seeing, you know, what somebody who drives a rickshaw in India's life is like, or they're not seeing, you know, even people who live 3 miles away from them in their same town are experiencing. So I see that the job of the photojournalist and the art photographer who's got a photojournalistic background like me is to take people into those other worlds and even their own world and show them something that they don't know about it and let the people actually speak. So if you're able to do that, you know, successfully, then your project, in my mind, is successful. If you're merely, you know, and if we look at old stuff that's being, you know, that, you know, if you're merely being a tourist, you know, if you don't actually get into the world, then you're a tourist, and then you're taking your projections. You know, if you look through like old National Geographics from the 20s or 30s, it's like white guys on safari looking at the natives. You know what I mean? And National Geographic actually has morphed. They don't do that anymore. But even old Life magazines, and, you know, that journalism back then, it was kind of like that. And now, you know, in the 70s and 80s, people got out of that, and they really tried to embed themselves and get in there. And so that's actually a great thing.
Well, Steve, I really want to thank you for joining us today on our first show. I'd like to give your website so people can look at your work. Would you give us the URL, please? Spell it out.
It's www.stephenshames.com. That's STEPHENSHAM as in Martin, ES.com.
Thank you. And good luck with your upcoming books. And wish we had more time, but we have to kind of cut it short. Or cut it medium length.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on. It's great.
Thank you very much, and good luck on your upcoming gallery and so forth in France.
Well, I'll drink a toast to you in France. If I can find a good bottle of wine over there, I
might be able to.
I might be able to. I'm hoping.
Great. Steve, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next week for another edition of ZEISS Presents Full Exposure. If you can't watch, you can always catch the audio-only version on iTunes and Spotify. Follow us on Instagram at ZEISS_Full Exposure or on the web at ZEISSFullExposure.com. And to learn about the latest in ZEISS lenses, head to ZEISS.com.